A lot of us dudes, we have that mentality that we need to nut up and do it all on our own. And I carried that around for a long time. And you don't have to do that, man. There's power in surrender. It doesn't make you soft. It doesn't make you a pussy.
Welcome to Self-Made and Sober. I'm your host, Andrew Lassise with selfmade-coaching.com. And in this podcast, it's my job to interview people who are not only crushing it in business, but have also struggled with addiction in the past and are in long-term recovery. Be sure to join our Facebook group where we help entrepreneurs grow and scale their business at facebook.com/groups/SMC Mastermind, like Self-Made Coaching Mastermind. I hope you enjoy the show, and be sure to subscribe and rate the show afterwards so you can get notified each Friday when we put out a new episode. With me today is Shane Raymer, the creator and host of That Sober Guy podcast. It reaches listeners worldwide who are either in recovery or seeking recovery from alcohol and drugs. Shane's married to his best friend Jess, and they have 2 kids, Lucy and Cash. And on September 11th, 2013, Shane decided to turn his life around and get sober. And listeners of this show will know I'm a firm believer that if you got sober in 2013, you will end up staying sober for the rest of your life. Shane is a living, breathing testimonial, class of 2013. It's got to be something in the water, man.
It was a good year. 2013 was a good year, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, it was a terrible year, and then it started.
Yeah, it was a real bad year, and then it turned into a better year because we got sober, for sure.
Yeah, upon further review, it ended up being the start of something better.
That's right.
And and for those of you who are interested in SEO, Shane will rank number 1 if you type in That Sober Guy, and he also ranks number 1 if you type in, does walking a small dog make you a pussy? And I'm curious the background on that one.
Oh man, I love it, bro. I just took one of my homeboys, Shane. He came over yesterday, and I took Brody out, who is the small white dog. Brody's 11 years old, I think now, and I had this. He's my buddy, man, and I walk him almost daily. And I was just thinking about it one day. I was walking downtown here, and I thought to myself, man, I wonder if people look at me and they're just like, look at that guy with all those tattoos, and he thinks he's tough, but here he is walking this small white, and I don't think I'm tough, by the way, but just if you don't know me, you might think like, man, that guy kind of looks, he's got tattoos and whatever. And here he is walking this small white dog. And I just kind of started, am I a pussy? I started asking myself that question. And then it kind of became a running joke after that. So yeah. And I don't think it does, by the way, either, man. I think my dog is my homeboy, and whether he's big or small, shoot, man, I'm having a good time with him. Yeah,
my two dogs are like 10 pounds wet. So I was like, I was like, that is a good question. I hadn't taken the outside thought of, if when I walk them, do people think I'm a pussy?
Well, I think like
whatever.
Like most people have big dogs. I was never a dog owner growing up. We always had cats, which I'm not really a fan of cats anymore. But when we got a dog, it was just, that's all I knew. We got a small dog. And I see these dudes walking like pits, and they're walking German Shepherd, and those are beautiful dogs too. But like, I don't know, that's the thing. Like, to have a big dog it's this masculinity thing, and I got a little dog, so I'm not a pussy though. Damn it.
There's one thing I know is that walking a small dog does not make you a pussy. Yes. And that is the number 1 result for that question.
That is funny, man. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. That's great. I love it.
See, man, on this show, we ask the tough questions. Yeah. So what's going on in 2013 in Shane's life to make you want to get sober? Was it just everything's good and you're like, I should just stop doing drugs?
Man, I wish it would have been that easy. It was a long time coming. I had a 17-year run of abusing alcohol and drugs to deal with life, basically. It wasn't until, even up until today, as I continue just working my recovery and doing life, that I have come to realize that the drugs and the alcohol really weren't so much my problem. It was more of a me problem. Now, that's not to say that I don't have an issue with substances, and that could be food, sugar in particularly, alcohol, drugs, sex. It's that more mentality. And once I started to figure that out in my recovery and I continue to work on that, things start to make more sense. Back then, though, in 2013, in that last year, probably from about 2011 to 2013, that was really when it was at the peak of my addiction and the attitude of I just didn't really care anymore. I had I still have my daughter. She's 9 now, but she was a baby at the time. I had a little baby girl at the time, and I wanted these things to be a better father, to be a better husband to my wife, Jess. But at the same time, I was just angry, confused, insecure, all those things that we talk about when we do step work and in just life in general. I think some of the things that we deal with, and man, it just got really, really bad. And I think towards the end, I was really just exhausted, man. I was exhausted of living my life that way. And I knew God had something more for me. I didn't really know what it was, but it came to a point of sheer desperation where I knew I needed some help. I knew I couldn't do it on my own. I was tired of doing it on my own. I was tired of doing the same thing over and over and over every day, saying I wasn't going to do it again. So that's ultimately what led me to reaching out for help. I told my best friend Seth, and I told my wife Jess at the time, "Hey, look, I need some help." And I said, I can't do this on my own. I think I need to go to rehab. And so, within September, you mentioned September 11, 2013 is my sobriety date. I guess it would have been September 9th. I had kind of let that out of the bag. I was off to rehab within a couple of days from there.
So are you one of those people who actually got sober on their first try? If your date, when you said like, I'm over this and I'm going to rehab, and then you got sober?
Yeah, no, I didn't actually. I had tried a couple of times prior to that to get sober. And one of the things I did is I would switch back and forth a lot. I would go, I'm just going to smoke weed for now, and because my wife recently pointed this out. She goes, obviously the drinking was a huge issue, but she said she used to get more annoyed with my pot smoking than anything. Because I didn't get high, I stayed high. So from the moment I woke up at 4 a.m, and I was functioning, right? I mean, I would go to work. I had long commutes, but even weekends, work days, whatever, I would wake up at 4 a.m. I would immediately go out to get high, and I would stay high all day until I went to bed at night. And that for me, it was just a normal thing that I did. And then you mix in pills and cocaine and alcohol in a mix of all that. It's kind of a recipe for disaster. But yeah, I had tried switching off back and forth, and it never worked. I think the longest I put together, I think I had almost 30 days at one point. And it's funny, I had this realization. I thought I was so damn smart at the time. My wife and I were having issues, and we were just having a tough time. I think I got to like 25 days or something, and it was New Year's. And I had this realization like, wait a minute here. We're still arguing. We still have financial issues. I still have all this shit I'm carrying around. I'm going back to drinking. Obviously it's not working, whatever I'm doing, so drinking's not the problem. So that took me back there. And yeah, man, it was a battle back and forth for quite a few years. I always knew I had a problem. I knew I needed some help. And it wasn't until I kind of fully surrendered and said, I can't do this on my own, and actually went into rehab. That's when the acceptance, surrender, all that stuff started to happen.
So do you think rehab itself played a big role in your sobriety, or was that just sort of the first step that you had to take in order to go on the journey?
I think probably a combination of both, man. I think it was definitely the first step. It was the first time that I openly admitted I have a legitimate problem with alcohol and drugs and I need some help. I think the seriousness of committing to leaving my family, like I said, I had, my daughter was only 2 at the time. And that was a really tough decision. What are my friends going to think of me? What is my family going to think of me? What's my work going to say? Are they going to know? Am I going to get fired? All these types of different thoughts running through my head. And at the end of the day, I knew that if I didn't take that chance and make that small, we're talking about 30 days here. There's people that are fighting in wars overseas for months at a time that are away from their family. So when I put it in that perspective, and it's my own doing at the same time, like I really needed to nut up and go for it. But there was a lot of fear there, to initially go. But I knew if I went and I made that commitment that there was something on the other side in this new life of sobriety that was going to benefit my family, my wife, my daughter, my job, everything. tenfold if I could commit to this and do it. So that was a part of it. And then actually going into rehab was huge, man. I was like a sponge in that place. It took me a couple of days to kind of get out of the detox room and get acclimated. Like I was a mess when I kind of went in, just emotionally wondering how I got there. Why was I here? But then once I got in there very early on, I said to myself, like, okay, I'm here, I'm doing this, I'm going all in on this, and I'm going to soak all this shit up so that way I can get a better life out there. So I really committed to it once I got in there, to listening, being open, being honest, and being ready to change.
So you went in just open-minded. You probably threw out all previous conceptions of what was right and wrong, up and down, and you just said, whatever you guys tell me, it's got to be better than what I'm doing now. Is that sort of where your mind was at?
Yeah, that's probably a good way to put it. Whatever I was doing definitely wasn't working. You know, a big part of my story too is I grew up in a very alcoholic and emotionally abusive and just a pretty chaotic environment. And so I saw a lot of that stuff growing up. And I had always said I never wanted to bring that stuff into my own family. And I was slowly doing that from 2011 to 2013, especially. I mean, there was a lot leading up to that too. But that was a moment for me when I went into rehab too, when I mentioned about soaking it up like a sponge. I also realized like I have an opportunity to really change the cycle of my family. I really have an opportunity here to break that stigma, break that cycle that's been affected potentially for generations if we really look into it. So that was a big part of it too. I really wanted to be a good father and a good husband.
So a lot of times they'll say though, when you get sober, it has to be, you want to get sober for you and everything else is a byproduct. So it seems like it was in the realm of you wanted it for you, but also your family was a big factor towards it. Do you think that plays some role in it as well?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Andrew. Like I can have all the resources, I can have the support, all that stuff for somebody, but if they don't want help, they're not going to get it and they're not going to use that stuff. And maybe if they do even attempt to do it, if they don't want it for themselves, it's just not going to work. To that point, I was very aware of that once I got in there. And I went to a place called Azure Acres in Sebastopol, California. And the staff there was great. The individual therapy along with group therapy, the support, the setting, everything was just really fit for me. And so I think that really helped for me to take it in. And they really did a good job of helping me understand that it had to come from me first. So obviously, yeah, I wanted to be a better father, a better husband. I wanted to be a good role model for, I have a son now too, who was born shortly after I got out. And that was definitely there, but I knew if I didn't do it for me first and kind of put myself first, which is a hard thing to do, man. Like we're talking about alcoholism and addiction here. It's already selfish enough as it is, all the shit that I was doing for years prior. Now I got to be even more selfish and be like, oh, I got to do this for me. It sounds kind of shitty, but when I put it into perspective, I know that was the right decision to start benefiting later on for my family. So yeah, I think it was a combination of both, but ultimately I had to be the one that really wanted to do it.
Yeah. I see a lot of people that they get forced into 12-step meetings, whatever the case is, and they sit in the back and they don't get involved. They don't want to participate. And then they go out as a spokesman for those programs. I mean, just for instance, my father was, he had to go to 12-step meetings. And before I had gotten sober, he had told me, like, Andrew, you're going to hate it. All they do is sit there. They talk about God. And I was very, very agnostic at the time. He said, they talk about God. I don't understand why like the court system is sending me to this church program. But that's what 12-step is. And so that in my mind, that's what it was. And I mean, he wasn't forced into actually working a 12-step program. He wasn't actually participating in it. He was just on the sidelines, getting the sheet filled. So it's crazy to see how now that I've lived it and I know the information that he was telling me, it wasn't accurate. But from his point of view, it was extremely accurate because they told him, you need to go to these meetings. That is how you will get fixed. And do you think people just going to meetings will get sober or improve their lives? What has been your experience with people that just attend meetings, don't participate in 12-step?
Well, I can't really speak for anyone else, but what I can speak to is the point with your father. I think that's a good example of you can only share your experience. So whether I relate or we agree or disagree with somebody's experience, that was your dad's experience at that time. For me, I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I was reminded of the three things with, community, 12-step, being in recovery. You got to be willing, you got to be honest, and you got to be open-minded. I remembered that when that was said in the meeting, and I went, man, I love that, because it's so true. Like, those three things are key to really anything in life. I think that you can, even if we're not talking about recovery, if we're just talking about anything, whether it's spirituality or, a marriage, anything you're working on to try to improve yourself, you got to be willing, you got to be honest, and you got to stay open-minded. If we go into situations and we already have this, maybe we've listened to somebody on what they've told us, just in like your instance, well, that's that person's experience. Let me experience this myself and then make my own conclusion. And I think for me, this goes into even a bigger picture of freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom to experience life in my own aspect and not be influenced by any outside thing. That's what I can share. Nobody can tell me that I'm fucking wrong at that. You know what I'm saying? Because that's my experience. So yeah, I like I said, I don't really know that I can speak for anybody. I know that also for me, I have to be actively working. That means having a mentor, a sponsor, an accountability partner, whatever you want to call it. I need to be doing the work. Like I had a sign up on my bench for a while, and I should probably put it back up there, but it just said put in work. And it just means like I got to show up every day and I got to put the work in. And I think that's what prohibits a lot of people from doing the things that they want to do in life. They see people that are successful or that are doing the thing. They don't see all the shit that they went through before to get to that point. And what did they do? They put in work. So you really got to put the work in and be dedicated to do that.
Yeah, it's kind of like that inspirational poster that's got the iceberg and it's like the tip of it and it says success, and then like the bottom part where it's super, super big below the water with all the heartbreak, failure, and all those things. Yeah, but that's very true. And most people, they just want that tip of the iceberg. They want well, I'm no longer drinking, drugging. Now I'm successful in business and entrepreneurship. People want to have Tim Ferriss has like the 4-hour work week, and people are like, oh man, I want to work just 4 hours, but they don't want to put in all the systems in place that go into creating that amount of freedom, and the ability to 10x your time is kind of the idea behind the book. But people, they see, 4 hours of work, that would be great. Yeah. 8 to 12, the end of my week. How do I do that? But they don't want to put in the effort and all the work that goes into it.
I've read 4-Hour Work Week. I'm familiar with Tim Ferriss's work. And I think that there's something to say for that. That's Tim Ferriss. So Tim Ferriss is doing what Tim Ferriss does. And I think a lot of the time, and I'm guilty of this too. Like, I look at somebody else and I think like, man, I want to do that, or I want to be like them, or I want to do it the way they do it. Well, we're all individuals and we're all different. And so one thing that works for somebody, it's not going to replicate another person's thing exactly, because it's a different person and something. Now you can take that general formula or idea and kind of create your own thing out of that for sure. But I try to, my buddy Trip Lanier, who actually, he hosts the New Man podcast. That's what got me started into podcasting. He was a big inspiration for me to start Sober Guy. I had a conversation with him one time, and one of the things that he told me that has always stuck out to me, he said, don't worry about what everyone else is doing. Just do you. Just do what you do. And I have to keep myself in check sometimes on that, because it's very easy, especially with social media, with this more mentality. We need to be doing more. I need to be doing this, need to be doing that, to get really caught up in that stuff. And that doesn't do anything for me except just jack me all up. I need to stay focused on what I enjoy to do. Is it fun? Is it fulfilling needs for, my family, that kind of stuff. And I think when I stay on that track, that's when I'm kind of in my lane and I'm on that wave, on that right wave that works for me, I guess.
So your secret sauce is really that everybody needs to just find their own way. but you still have mentors along the way.
Absolutely.
Showing you, hey, you know, every person is a snowflake in a sense, but there are some universal truths that if you can apply these principles, and, you know, one of the big things, the takeaways from 12-step recovery, you know, people come in there, I'm trying to stop drinking, I'm trying to stop using, I'm trying to stop gambling, I'm trying to stop, you name it. There's like 100 different 12-step groups. But at the end of the day, and you kind of came to this realization when you were trying to get sober before, when you recognized that, hey, I've been sober and I still have all these problems in my life. Yeah. I guess the drink wasn't actually the problem. And that's kind of like what like the end game of 12-step recovery is for a lot of people is, oh, I still have all these problems even without all of the drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
And the one step further that you didn't get was the problem is me. How do I change me? Yeah. What can I do differently? What am I currently doing? What beliefs do I have that are not serving me? What can I do to change? And a victim won't be able to recognize that because life is happening to me.
Yeah.
And, you know, like we said, 2013 was like the best and worst year of at least my life. Like it was the lowest I had ever felt right before I got sober in March.
Yeah.
It's tough to just like explain that feeling, but then to come around and find out that, oh yeah, it wasn't everybody else's fault. It was actually my fault all along. And, you know, taking ownership in it, though, the great news, and this goes to entrepreneurship as well as sobriety, is that you have more control than you think. And because you have some sense of control, and I'm not saying you have to control all people, all pieces, everything all the time, but you can change the path. Like you said, you were breaking the cycle in the family. Like that's a conscious decision that you got to make. And then you took actions in accordance with that decision. So how important is it that you can take control as you're moving forward in recovery?
The control thing, it's almost like a trigger word for me. I just realized, like, control, because there's kind of two sides of it. It's like, I want to be in control of things, but that could really be detrimental to me because I'm a control freak. Sometimes when I try to control things is usually when I'm jacked up the most. So like really working with my sponsor, who's been just an amazing dude for me to work with. His name's Buddy. He actually lives in Georgia, which is crazy. That's a whole nother story how we ended up hooking up because I'm out in California. But the control thing, we talk about that a lot, about going with the flow, about surrender, about accepting the things the way that they are in this moment and living in the moment and letting go. So I think that there's a side of it for me that really tries to dive in when we say the word control to approaching control from kind of that perspective of what I just said about not having control. At the same time, there are things in my life, like I still have goals, I still have dreams. I can't just fly by the seat of my pants. I have to have a plan. I have to have a strategy. So I have to be able to kind of balance those two perspectives, if that makes sense. The other thing I wanted to say real quick too, so I don't forget, is I've been working this recovery stuff for a couple years now, and a few years, and sometimes it gets tiring, and sometimes I feel like there's just things that we can just say because it's like this recovery speak, recovery talk kind of stuff. And I always try to be as transparent and as real as possible. And I think that's why a lot of people can relate to the podcast so much. But like, I don't have it all figured out. Like I'm not, and I hope I don't ever want to try to come across like I do. Like I don't know shit. And that's one really good thing about my recovery program today is that I'm okay with saying I don't know. Like I used to really beat myself up if I didn't know something. Like I don't have all the answers for everybody. I don't have all the answers for everything in life. Like I still am constantly working on my marriage, on being a father, on being a better friend. Like I'm still working on how to stay sober, like, day in and day out. Like it's really, and the other thing, I'm learning how to be an entrepreneur too. Like you mentioned earlier about having a mentor and having people that inspire you. And that stuff's so important. If there's one thing I've learned is I can't do life on my own. I got to have good people around me. So I just kind of wanted to mention that too, for someone out there listening, like surround yourself with the best people. Don't think that you got it all figured out. I know for me, like as soon as I start to go down that path, like I got this, and it's happened a couple of times, like boom, like it smacks me in the face and kind of knocks me back and goes, hey bro, like you need to check yourself and get in line. Like the minute you stop learning and growing, I mean, I might as well just be dead at that point.
Yeah. And having the humility to actually be doing something. And I mean, we're relatively young, but you know, you do something for 6 years and like, you kind of get all right, I know what's going to happen. Like I see people at my home group and it's like, okay, let me guess. He's going to share about the time he stole that tank. Yeah. Yep. There he is sharing about stealing the tank again. And it's going to come back around to gratitude. Yeah, there it is. He's talking about gratitude again. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for keep coming back. Yeah. That's, you know, been hearing a lot of the same things over and over, but we as humans, we need to hear things multiple times from multiple different perspectives. So I know I used to get kind of flustered with it and it was like, can't you share something unique? And then what I kind of came to realize was that they had said it enough times that I paid attention.
Yeah.
I paid attention to what they were trying to say. They actually hit me with that message. So while on the surface, it's like, heard this one before. It's like, yeah, maybe it's important that you keep hearing this and having that humility to know, I don't know all the answers. And that's something that's really important, especially, and he was on your show a couple of weeks ago, Darren Littlejohn. He talks about the funnel, if you remember that, where it's people between like 6 and 12 years sober that just, you know, they just kind of disappear. Like that funnel, it just gets smaller and smaller. And like we're in the beginning stages of that at 6 years where there aren't a ton of people picking up, at least not in my area. Most of the medallions is 1 to 5 and then like 20 to 40. But like the 6 to 15, 20 range, like there's 1 or 2 here and there, but is that what it's like over where you guys are at?
I know that there's one thing that is really scary for me, and it's like just what you're saying, like that 6 year, that 10 year, that 15 year, even that 20 year. I hear these horrible stories of, you know, I just heard one when we were down in Coronado for the Foundations conference down there. We were in the spa and I got to chatting with a guy. And that's the other thing, no matter who I talk to, I mean, as I talk to people all over the place, not just on the podcast, but just in the community, when we travel, all random people. And as soon as I tell them kind of what I do or that I'm in recovery, dude, it's always their dad or their brother or maybe them, or dude, it affects so many people. And that's why I love, like, you know, podcasts like you're doing, the work you're doing, like the work Sober Guy's doing, Darren Littlejohn. I mean, all these people, this community together that's helping to like bring this shit more out in the open and talk about it. We're a part of a huge, massive movement right now that is really, really exciting because it's changing the way people look at recovery. It's changing the way people look at sobriety. It's even affecting the beer industry. Like you look at a lot of these big beer companies, like Heineken just came out this 0.0 beer. And I was reading this article on it that someone sent over to me. And it was talking about how even the beer companies are realizing that not everybody wants to drink anymore. It's this real movement that we're a part of, and it's really cool. But, you know, I was talking to this guy and he was telling me this story about how his dad had 20 years sober and that, you know, he stopped going to meetings. He stopped doing his program. He was just kind of living life. And, you know, I can't remember if he went to a casino or he went to somewhere, a party, something like that. And he ended up drinking and he went out again. And it was like 10 times worse than before when he had drank, and he was trying to get sober again. And it was that hard after 20 years to get back on the horse, you know, having a relapse like that. And so my point is that that's one thing, is keeping, I have a bunch of those stories, you know, with different people that I know and that I've heard. And that's one thing that helps to keep me in check and to really almost be fearful in my own right, and to keep going and to keep trying to stay plugged in and not get complacent, not think I got it figured out, just kind of take it one day at a time and know that this whole life thing is so much less about alcohol, drugs, even recovery, it's just about learning how to live life, like on life's terms and not on Shane Raymer's terms. I don't know if that makes sense, man, but
no, that's such a really interesting perspective, in that it really does affect so many people, not just the people directly who are trying to recover, but the families and the people that are involved with it. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people as a result of this show who have just reached out and been like, hey, I just want you to know, like, I sent this to my daughter because she needs to be hearing this message, and I really appreciate what you do. And it's like kind of cool for the ego, but at times it's like, okay, tone it down. and honestly, like the foundation of this podcast, like initially it was about the business angle to supplement my business coaching side of my company, but then it kind of evolved into like so many people getting so much impact from the recovery side that it was like, okay, you know, give the people what they want. And like, it's a message that so many people need to hear. And were you thinking kind of the thoughts I was thinking was, no one else understands what it's like for me to be a 26-year-old bar manager with a drinking problem. Like, you guys don't understand what I'm going through. Like, if your life felt like mine, then you would drink the way I do. Was that going through your mind at all, that like just people don't get it?
I don't know if I ever really thought like people don't get it. I just went hard. That's just what I did, man. I'm a musician too. And so I put out an album in 2011 called Chemical Diet with a good friend of mine who was in a car accident shortly afterwards, and it's affected him for life. He almost died. He was in a coma for 52 days and, almost took his life. And that was kind of a wake up call for me, to where it wasn't so much like people just don't understand me. It was more or less like, damn, I'm living my life like trying to go hard like this and put on this persona that I'm this like, this musician and I'm going to be in the music industry. And that's, if you're going to be in that industry, you need to be like this big time partier and have this crazy stuff and do drugs and alcohol. Like, that was kind of the way that I was living at the time. And so for me, it was more about, this behavior is not who I want to be anymore, I guess. I wasn't really too concerned so much with what people were thinking or if they understood me, I guess. Although the only thing I could say to that is I looked for people to understand me through my music, if that makes sense. So I would tell stories through the music that I wrote, and I really enjoyed putting that out. But when I look back on a lot of the music that I wrote, although some of it was good, there was a lot of victim mentality stuck in it still. And so it was like this victim mentality meshed together with this like case of the fuck it's, where I just was like, fuck the world. Like, I don't even care. Like, I'm just going to go hard until I die or until I get a record contract or something. It was just really immature way of thinking, man. And so that's kind of what my thought process was towards the end of my days using.
So you were touching on that party life, and I mean, I'm going to assume 6 years of being sober, you've probably been to a party or a situation where there is alcohol. Do you have any escape plan or strategy that you use when you go to situations that may be a little shaky?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I get this question a lot on the show. So here's a couple of things that I do. Number one, I have a reason to be there. That's first and foremost. If I don't have a reason to be somewhere, I don't need to be there. So is someone getting married? Like, I just celebrated one of my homeboy, Scotty's 40th birthday. Those dudes, they're all my homies, but they still go hard. And I don't go like that anymore. But it was his 40th birthday. We rented a big house out in Truckee, had an amazing time. But it was crazy. Like, I was in an environment that I'm normally not in, anymore. I wanted to have a good time, but I also had a purpose to be there. And here's kind of some of the tips that I could give on something like that. I have an exit strategy. So as soon as I hear a story 2 or 3 times from the same person, yeah, bro, you already told me that story. Okay, I probably know it's probably about time to go to bed. And I can't remember who I was just talking to. I don't know if it was Chris Bell or someone I just talked to. We were talking about that, and they mentioned that, and it just popped into my head again, because I've been in that situation so many times. Like, someone telling me, just tell you about the time that I went over to, I'm like, okay, bro, like it's okay. I got to go, So I have those cutoff points, usually after 10, 11 o'clock, usually nothing good happens after that. The other thing that I do, so the exit strategy, I have a phone call strategy. Do I need to call my sponsor? Do I need to call one of my homeboys who I can just vent to if I start getting in a spot, if I can't leave? The other thing I like to do, I've been on soda water and cranberry lately with some lime. If I'm in a spot, social situation where there's drinking going on, I'll try to just have a drink with me too. No one really cares either, by the way, like if I'm not drinking. I've noticed I got so caught up, especially in the first couple of years, that like people were worried about I'm not drinking. Like no one really gives a fuck what you're doing because they're too worried about themselves anyway. That's just human nature. So once I kind of got over that, I keep a drink with me, whether it's, some Pellegrino, cranberry and soda water, just water, coffee. I drink a lot of coffee, I try to just keep that present. It kind of helps me feel a little more social or whatever. So yeah, man, I mean, a reason to be there, having something to drink on, and then having an exit strategy are probably my three biggest things for that.
Awesome, man. It's so cool. Like I know for myself, it was the first time. Actually, I had these were the exact same emotions. I remember I had turned 21 and I finally went to the liquor store and had my ID and they didn't card me. And I came to this realization, like, are you kidding me? I could have been buying from you all this time and this has existed all along. So that was like me at 21 and then sober at 26. And the first time I went to a party and I was thinking, man, everyone's going to notice I'm not drinking. What do I tell them? This and that, and coming up with all these like excuses and rebuttals, and no one ever said anything. And it's like, are you kidding? Like no one ever cared ever.
Yep. Everyone's too worried about themselves.
Yeah. We're all the stars in our own show. I forget who to cite this from, but they had made a reference to in the Big Book. They talk about the actor who wants to run the whole show.
It's one of my favorite parts, bro.
And the speaker, he was saying, the way that I looked at it is that there is an entire production going on with all the actors, the sound, the orchestra. Everybody's involved in this show, and I'm just the janitor. And everybody pays all this money to come see this show. And meanwhile, I'm thinking the whole time, you know what the show should be about? The show should be about the janitor who works on the set of this great show, because people would really want to hear what the janitor has to say on his perspective instead of the stars of the show. They should really be talking about the janitor.
Have they seen how well I waxed this damn floor? Have they seen it?
Yeah. Yeah, you all wouldn't be enjoying this show so much if your shoes were sticking, would you?
Yeah, do they know how well I get my motion going when I mop this floor? They don't even know about how well I am. Yeah, I know. I feel that's a great analogy.
So Shane, give us a little background on what was going through your mind when you decided to start Sober Guy.
Yeah, so I was 6 months, roughly 6 months, I think, out of rehab. Like I mentioned prior, I was, a musician, and I still love music. I love listening to music. A bunch of records behind me here. I love old punk rock. And one of the big things for me was that when I got home, one of the ways that I connected to music before was through drugs and alcohol. I would get high as a kite and write and play. And, I had a lot of good times actually doing that. I do still feel like sometimes there's a certain space you can get into when you're creating stuff like that. The problem for me is that I abuse that space and I don't know how to stop. But when I got sober, it was really tough for me to go back to doing music. I kind of felt like I had shedded some skin, and I was onto a new place in my life. And the reason for doing music that I had wanted to before wasn't really there anymore. And I really feel like one thing that has helped me so much is finding something that I enjoy to do to stay sober. One of the things that has helped me is to be doing something creative. Like I'm an artist, like I love to create stuff. And I really feel like if people that are trying to get sober can find something they enjoy to do and they have a passion for it, I think that's been for me a huge driving factor in what's helped to keep me sober. And so kind of to make a long story short, I mentioned Trip Lanier earlier from the New Man podcast. And I was commuting and my buddy Justin told me, hey, check out this podcast. I said, what the hell is a podcast? I'd only heard music podcasts from one of my buddies who was a DJ before. So I started listening to the New Man commuting. And I literally sat up in bed one night shortly after listening to the podcast more. And I told my wife, I'm going to start a podcast. This was in the beginning of 2014. I said, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I already had all the equipment. I had mixing boards and I had a lot of experience in production and sound and stuff from my music days. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it was birthed. It was really an outlet for me to be creative and to help me stay sober. That was really my only intention when I started it. And I did think too, like, wow, if I can share my story and I can get it out there, maybe it can help someone else understand that they're not alone out there and that there's other guys out there who are going through this stuff. So that's kind of how it started. And then, man, it's just kind of taken on its own life, I guess, as I continue to do it. And as I always say, like, as long as I'm having fun, I'll continue to do it. And the moment that I stop having fun, then I'm not going to do it anymore.
Yeah. And for people that haven't heard his show, I mean, you can tell that the connections that you have with your guest is like, it is definitely there. It's not just like here, I pre-wrote 20 questions and we're going to like do a quick Q&A. Like it's really
a conversation.
Fun. Yeah.
It's a conversation. I believe in the art of conversation. I believe that has been lost to some extent because of social media. You got everybody buried in their faces in their phone or their TV or their computer. And I'm guilty of it at times too. So I don't want to sound like a hypocrite because of the work I do. I'm on my phone and I'm on my computer a lot and I'm on it way too much, to be honest. And I really have to be conscious of it and regulate it. But with the podcast, that's one thing I love about it, especially a live podcast when I get to actually meet with people and do it, because that is the art of the conversation right there. And it really, I do feel like that's lost. That's part of the reason I love and enjoy doing it so much.
Yeah, that's so cool. What is some advice you have for people who are maybe struggling with addiction or trying to get sober but can't really seem to stick it? What advice would you have for them?
You got to put the work in. I think that goes back to, kind of what I was saying earlier. It's really, I felt like I wanted this magic answer for so long. Like, oh, you can do this and do that. And like, but really it's about showing up and putting in the work. That's really it. Like and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, you got to be willing, you got to be honest with yourself and with others, and you got to be open-minded. And if you think you can do those three things, you can definitely stay sober. Like there's a life outside. Culturally, drinking is such a big part of our culture. We drink to celebrate. We drink because we're sad. We drink at a birthday. We drink at a funeral. We drink at a party, at a wedding, whatever. It's all this part of it. And that's fine for people who can responsibly have a beer or a drink and not be dumbasses about it afterwards, and they can stop. For guys like me, like I can't do that. Never was able to do that. And so I think, just putting in the work and showing up and being willing and honest and open-minded is one thing. And then, the other thing is being easy on yourself, man. Give yourself grace. Like I've really had to learn how to give myself grace and not beat myself up over past things I've done or things that I still do now that I, get down on myself about. I can't change the past. I can only look ahead and I can try to be in the moment and do the next right thing. So give yourself some grace. And then, man, this last thing is like, if you're really struggling, like just reach out for help. Like it's not weak to reach out for help. It doesn't make you soft. It doesn't make you a pussy. It doesn't, however you want to put it. If, you have that, a lot of us dudes, we have that mentality that we need to nut up and do it all on our own. And I carried that around for a long time. And you don't have to do that, man. There's power in surrender. That's one thing that I've been able to find is that I think it's Paul, who's the Apostle Paul, who said, when I'm weak, I'm strong. And that's one of my favorite things, like vulnerability and being open and honest has really helped to get me being able to stay sober. So just reach out, man. Reach out for help if you need it. There's nothing weak about it.
Awesome. And so moving forward with Sober Guy, what would you say has been, there's millions of podcasts out there. What has really separated you from the millions of other people that are all kind of trying to do the same thing?
First of all, I'm not in competition with anybody. I believe that there's plenty of people out there that are affected by addiction. There's plenty of people that are out there in health and wellness, and there's plenty of space for everybody. So I think first thing I would say is that it's an honor to be a part of the community. It's also really, really cool just to see how many podcasts the industry is exploding right now. And there's so many people starting up and spreading the word to their own communities and across the world, across the states. I think that part is really exciting and it's really cool. And it's really an honor, like I said, to be a part of it. Next to that, the one thing I will say, and I say this very humbly, very honestly, and with excitement, I guess, too, is that when I started this, I really did have a vision to really help end the stigma. And there wasn't a lot of other podcasts about recovery other than, you had Dr. Drew. I think there was the Recovered podcast and the AA podcast. I think Anna David had her show out at the time. And so it really is kind of cool to be one of the first ones who really jumped into this game in spreading the word and being open with my recovery to the public. I do take some pride in that. And when I say that, I make sure I always say that very, very humbly, like I'm not competing with anybody at any time or place or whatever, but it is pretty awesome to be, one of the first ones who kind of started speaking out openly just as a regular dude.
You've been doing it for years. Have there been any points where you were like, you know what? I mean, you said like you'll stop when it stops being fun. Like, has it just been fun for the most part for the last 5 years?
It's been a lot of fun. There has been times when I've wanted to quit. I think I underestimate how much the shows help keep me sober too. It's therapy for me. It's it's a big part of my recovery, talking about recovery with different people on a sometimes daily basis, definitely a weekly basis, between my sponsor, podcasts I'm recording, and just people in general. That's been a really big part about it. But yeah, there has been times when I've wanted to quit, and I'll tell you why I've wanted to quit. It's because I set expectations, and then expectations aren't met of the expectations that I have. I have to have no expectations. It doesn't mean that I can't have visions and dreams. And, one of my dreams is to be able to continue and do recovery work 100% full time. I mean, that's really where my passion is. That's really what I like to do, something in that space. The times that I've wanted to quit, I started questioning that. Why am I even doing this? This didn't happen, or this didn't work out the way I was supposed to. And at the end of the day, that's not what it's about. It's about me staying sober. It's about me spreading the word of recovery and just being of service. And when I keep that in mind, that's when I have fun. And that's when it's right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think as long as you keep just the intention behind it of, I am doing this to just keep my recovery in check. I'm doing this because this is my passion. I'm doing this because I enjoy it. I've found that to be so true. And, that's for myself, just continuing to do it. And I mean, early on, I was just like, it's a show with like some of my friends and stuff. And then my coach, he was like, well, who are people you look up to? Like make things happen. And I mean, just in the short time I've been doing this, it's like, okay, I get to talk with that sober guy, and like not stroking the ego or anything, but like it's cool to like be able to have people that you're speaking to that are speaking the truth, that have been there, And so is there any other takeaways that you want listeners to have as far as recovery or entrepreneurship, starting a podcast, any big takeaways you want people to have from this conversation?
Thank you for that, man. That was a compliment, dude, and I appreciate it. And I'm learning how to receive compliments. That's another big thing just in recovery. Like, I don't know if you've been through that. Like I had a lot of negativity spoke over me as a kid. So as I've gotten into recovery, like being able to receive a compliment has been a bit of a challenge, and I'm getting better at it. It's okay to have people shoot you a little love or whatever. So thank you for that. Number two, I think it's a really good point that you made. Like when you put yourself out there, you can do anything. Like you can literally do anything you want if you're willing to put yourself out there and go for it. Like you reached out to me. I'm a normal dude. You're a normal dude. People put people on these pedestals. I feel like sometimes, whether it's in business or a lot with media, you know what I mean? Actors, musicians. And I'm not saying that these people don't do cool things and they do some awesome work and they have these cool lives or whatever. But I always say that dude wipes his ass just like I do. You know what I mean? Like we're all in the same boat. And I think if we can kind of get on that level playing field, as we're all human beings, some of us do a little bit cooler stuff. You know, some of us have worked harder. Some of us been through harder stuff. Some of us, everyone's different, but just connecting with people, that's where it's at, dude. And so like for anyone out there listening, you want to start a podcast. You know, you want to start a business. You want to do something that benefits your family, and you want to do whatever it is, like you can do it. You just got to put yourself out there and do it and go after it, you know? And I think that when we can do that, we can really see some really amazing things happen.
Yeah, I think fear plays such a big role in people's lives where they're just like, oh, well, I can't do that because like, what if it doesn't work out? What if people think this of me? What if people think that of me? Like I've had, just from my own experience, like I have had some grand slam wins in my life. I have had some things, and it's funny you were talking about taking compliments. Just a couple months ago, I was talking about the companies that I had built and stuff, and this lady was like, oh my God, that's so incredible. And I was like, oh no, it's not me, it's all the team.
You want to downplay it.
It's the team. She's like, yeah, but weren't you the one that put the team together? Weren't you the one that started it in your living room? Like, because I had told her my story is just the quick version is like I started it, made no money, and then it blew up from 36,000 to 1.7 million within a year. So I was telling this lady that story, and she's like, you were part of that. And I'm like, no, it was my team. She's like, it's great that you're humble about it, but like, you can accept a compliment. Like you can say thank you, and that doesn't make you a bad person. So when you were saying that, it kind of like struck me. It's like, yeah, that's exactly what that lady was saying. Like,
well, it's good too, because like and I think there's a spot, the more I try to understand this thing, because obviously we don't want ego to take over, right? Like a lot of us in recovery, my ego can get like ridiculous, you know, if I let it. And so I have to be able to take a compliment and understand that it's not egotistical to take a compliment, but I also have to be able to praise, like you said, your team. Like your team probably did have a big part in that. And so you do want to say, man, you know what? Like, man, thank you. I appreciate that. You know, it did start in my living room. That was really cool. But man, you know, as much as I started it, I have this awesome team behind me that has really helped support. You know, John did this, and you know, Karen did that, or whatever the hell.
No, like, John was terrible.
I think John sucked, and I fired his ass. No, but you know what I'm saying though, right? I mean, you get that rounded kind of thing where, and I think that's like I think that's where it's at, man. Yeah,
the nice middle ground of, you know, and it feels weird too. Like if you say to someone, hey, you know, what you did was great, and they're like, no, I don't accept your praise. Like, you know, what do I do with that? It's like Talladega Nights. Like, what do I do with my hands? Like, I don't
know what to do with my hands.
What do I do with my hands? I don't.
That movie's great.
Yeah. All right, Shane. Well, I want to be conscious of your time. Thank you so much for being on the show. Where can people find you?
Yeah, if you just go to thatsoberguy.com, all the info's on there. I use Instagram for the most part, at real that sober guy on Instagram, at Shane Raymer on Twitter. We have some live shows that we do down in the LA area and up in Northern California as well. So if you ever want to check out a live podcast, you can go to the website and see that there. Yeah, that's about it, man. Andrew, it's an honor to be on your show, man. I appreciate it, and congrats on your recovery, sobriety, and congrats on the show too, man. It's really helping a lot of people, man, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Thanks, man. I'll accept that. I will accept that praise.
There you go.
That's my takeaway, is learn how to say thanks. But Shane, take care, man.
Yeah, you too, brother. Peace.
Thank you so much for listening to Self-Made and Sober. Be sure to join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/SMC Mastermind, like Self-Made Coaching Mastermind. I hope you enjoyed the show, and be sure to subscribe and rate the show so you can get notified each Friday when we put out a new episode.